I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we discuss updates from across the battlefront and speak to Ukrainian chef and food writer Olia Hercules about her and her family's experience in the war, Russian colonialism, and the challenges faced by Ukrainians who've left their country more than 3 months after the start of the invasion.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, we sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Tuesday, the 14th of June, day 111, and today I'm joined by assistant comment editor Francis Dearnley and, in the studio, Olia Hercules. Our regular contributor Dominic Nicholls is away in Norway with the British Defence Secretary. I started by asking Francis for the latest news from across Ukraine.
Yes, well, several developments in the last few days and obviously in the last 24 hours as well. So first of all, Russian forces have cut off the last routes for evacuating citizens from the eastern Ukrainian city of Severodonetsk, according to a Ukrainian official there, as part of the Russian strategy to push for victory in the Donbass region. We understand that this was the last bridge to the city has been destroyed, trapping remaining civilians there and making it impossible to deliver humanitarian supplies. We've heard from the regional governor, a man called Sergei Gadai, who says that now 70% of the city is under Russian control and that some 15,000 civilians are now thought to be stranded in the city. And of course, the concern here is that, aside from the strategic concerns in military perspective, is that this may well be another Mariupol type situation where if the Russians feel that they cannot take it through conventional means, that they will essentially raze it to the ground. It's already received considerable Russian bombardment, and that's the concern. And just speaking to that, a Russian-backed separatist leader in the Donetsk People's Republic has warned that the Ukrainian troops in Severodonetsk must surrender or die. So quite concerning picture there. We're also hearing that from another spokesman of President Zelensky's ministry that Ukraine has lost a quarter of its arable land since Russia's invasion, most notably in the south and the east. This is from the Deputy Agriculture Minister. But he insists that the food security of the country is not threatened. And I quote, "Despite the loss of 25% of arable land, crop planting this year is more than sufficient to ensure food for the population." That's what he's told a news conference. But obviously this speaks to, as we've spoken about many times on the podcast, given Ukraine's prominence as a development, as a grower of considerable supplies, food supplies for Europe and the wider world, particularly Africa. Even if the food security of Ukraine is secure, then there are concerns that may have a big impact around the world, and we've obviously covered that many times previously. We've also hearing as well that well, actually, I'll pause there for a second. We're conscious I've spoken quite a lot, so you may have something you want to say on there, David.
Well, I was actually going to try and get us to talk a little bit about the fallout from the report we talked about yesterday on the podcast, which detailed how much money, how many billions of euros the Russian state has made from the sale of its fossil fuels since the start of the invasion. And there's been some repercussions across Europe, particularly for Emmanuel Macron, who's been accused of betraying Ukraine. Would you like to speak to that, Francis?
Yes, well, it's been very interesting that Russia, we understand, has made 93 billion euros in fossil fuel exports during the first 100 days of the war. And a large percentage of that, of course, has been from France, Germany too, but France as well. And Macron has actually been accused of betraying the Ukraine, quite strong words, after figures showing that the French imports of Russian gas have risen considerably since the invasion. The EU in total has accounted for 61% of Russia's total fossil fuel exports, which is worth around 57 billion, even as the bloc has moved to reduce its dependence on Russian energy. And it appears that France, Belgium and the Netherlands have snapped up shipments of the Kremlin's fossil fuels at discounted prices after other buyers have cut back on their purchases during the conflict. So yes, not a pretty picture on the energy front, unfortunately. And as I say, France has become particularly criticised in this context because we understand that they've received 12 shipments of liquidated natural gas and other fossil fuels product worth over 900 million since April and May. So very, very considerable amounts here, and it just speaks to, as we've spoken about many times, Europe's dependence on Russia. But it's certainly not a good look, and I think that in the coming weeks and months we're going to be seeing just whether the commitments made by the European Union on the question of energy is really going to happen, or whether, as it would currently appear, there was a lot of posturing but a very different reality.
And can I just ask you to talk a little bit about one more update? There's been a report from Amnesty International who said on Monday that Russian cluster munitions have killed hundreds of civilians in the city of Kharkiv in the east, accusing Moscow of war crimes. I mean, this adds to a catalogue of alleged war crimes through the conflict. Can you speak to that a little bit, Francis?
Yes, well, cluster munitions have been condemned, and even there have been agreements that have been signed by many nations that will say that they will never use them. But it would appear that Russian cluster munitions have killed hundreds of civilians in Kharkiv, according, as you say, to Amnesty International. These are indiscriminate. That is the nature of cluster munitions, that they are indiscriminate, and they've been fired over the Ukraine's second city. Unfortunately and tragically killing civilians in their homes, in their streets, and in playgrounds, even cemeteries, we understand, whilst people are queuing for humanitarian aid and shopping for food. So terrible there, and we've done quite a long read today about these cluster munitions and the consequences of them, which I'd recommend that people read. Thank you very much, Francis. And just before we bring in Olia, probably important to mention this is just coming through on our live blog on the Telegraph, that the RIA news agencies, the Russian news agency, is reporting that the Russians have struck an artillery weapons depot with Caliber cruise missiles in the Chernihiv region in the north, and the Russian air defense forces claim to have shot down a Ukrainian MiG fighter jet and a Mi-24 helicopter. So there's more news coming out of the east. Can I welcome our guest, Olia Hercules? Olia is a chef and a food writer based in London. Olia, it's over to you, really. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you both for having me here, and thank you for doing this podcast. It's really important that you do it. It's important work. I was born in the Kherson region in a small town called Kakhovka, but I've been living in the UK for almost 20 years. And and I write cookbooks and I write about food normally, but now I'm also involved, like so many fellow Ukrainians in the UK and all over the world, in activism, trying to help however I can my family and fellow countrymen.
So tell us a little bit about the war for you and your family. How did you react? How did your family react? And what did they do? For months, they were actually incredibly stoic. So, being here, everything was just straight away, just extremely shocking. And we just didn't know how to react, really. But they were, defiant. And my parents actually refused to leave their home in Kakhovka in the Kherson region for weeks. And my brother was in Kiev at the time of the invasion, and he, at first, he thought he will go to Lviv with his sons. He's got two boys who are 19 and 22. But then he decided to remain in Kiev and to join the territorial defense, where he is still now. And after the Bucha massacre, it became obvious that atrocities, extreme atrocities, begin once communication kind of is
severed in parts of Ukraine, and actually we started losing connection with the Kherson region. So I pretty much forced my parents to leave while they still could. So they did, and my other family from the Kherson region have also left and are now in Western Ukraine. And I have an aunt who's in Berdyansk at the moment, and we're really worried about her because it's impossible to reach her at the moment.
I'm very sorry to hear about your aunt. You mentioned your brother's in the territorial army. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Do you get to speak to him often? What's his experience of the war been?
Yeah, he sends me a video every single morning, and he's doing well. When he joined, he sent me a picture of himself with a weapon but with no protective gear, and that kind of sent me into a complete kind of mode of shock. So I made sure to raise some funds and have sent him and his regiment protective gear, and I think there's thousands of Ukrainians that have been doing the same, and ever since then, he's been training. He's been near Bucha, actually helping to clear out after the event, and at the moment he is an officer, and he has been put in charge of logistics to do with food. So now he's in charge of 6,000 soldiers, from what I understood from our kind of latest conversation that we've had. And actually there's Kherson region, you've mentioned about the food supply, but Kherson region is actually one of the biggest suppliers of vegetables and fruit in Ukraine, and obviously all access to it is currently gone. So it's quite difficult to find things like beetroot and cabbages, he said. But some positive news from him was that he managed to find 400 kilograms of strawberries, which was an incredible treat for our defenders, because, when you're in a situation that they're in, any little kind of positive treat like that is a huge thing. So he really cheered me up actually on Friday, because I think I really hit a wall last week and was feeling quite low. But yeah, the strawberry story kind of picked me up a little bit.
Just while you're talking about social media and being able to communicate with your brother, obviously social media has played a really big role in the conflict, not only in terms of seeing what's going on the front lines, but also as communicating with ordinary soldiers and things like that. Just wanted to hear your take on how important social media has been in keeping the morale high.
Oh, I think it was a game changer. Possibly the first instance of, something like that happening in a way that, yes, we are not only connected to people on the ground, but we are also, I've also connected with, so many people in Ukraine, journalists, volunteers, as well as volunteers and journalists, ordinary people with a Ukrainian background or people that want to help Ukraine all over the world. So actually, we've been able to build this massive network and have been helping each other greatly. Even a simple thing like today, I've connected with a woman from New Kakhovka whose family is still there, and she just sent me a simple message today and said, look, I've got a family who's stuck in Germany. They've been put into a camp and they haven't been able to find a sponsor. Can you help to spread this information? And I did. So it's from the smallest things to the most complicated thing, like trying to get 150 bulletproof vests to a Ukrainian regiment.
Can we just talk about the Cook for Ukraine social media project while we're on this subject? Because it sounds like it's a really a huge one. I don't think many listeners will be aware of it, with nearly £1 million raised for UNICEF. So can you just talk to us about that? On February, on the day when the war started on the 24th, my friend and I, Alisa Timoshkina and I, met at a protest, and we were obviously in a state of shock, and we decided to
do something proactive instead of kind of just getting upset and being inactive. So we're both food writers, and we've been involved in the project Cook for Syria. And we knew the people that have founded it, and asked them for help to set up Cook for Ukraine. And we thought it would be just a really great way to educate people with regards to Ukrainian food. So initially it was going to be a hashtag, and people could make a Ukrainian dish, talk about Ukraine, spread the word, and in this way kind of help popularize Ukrainian culture. And then Alisa set up the Just Giving page, and we decided to collect money for UNICEF. And all of a sudden it just became a global movement, and people have been organizing events and anything from a small school bake sale to getting whole restaurants involved in raising money for Ukraine. It's been an incredible success.
Can we talk a little bit about the experience of Ukrainian refugees in Europe? People have left Ukraine for other countries. What's your experience 3 months on from what do you hear from the diaspora?
I would very happily talk about this. So just to give you kind of an overall understanding of how anyone who had family in Ukraine felt. I mean, I think it's quite obvious that everybody was in a state of shock and trauma. And my first reaction was, as soon as the family scheme came on, my first reaction was to tell all of my close-knit family in Ukraine, the ones that have been misplaced, had to leave their home, that, absolutely I will organize a family scheme visa for them without really knowing what it was or how it works, And, but nobody actually wants to leave. So none of my family came. My parents left, and they're now in Germany. And the only person that I have here in the UK is my niece, because she was in Lviv, and Lviv started getting bombed, and I insisted that I come and get her from Poland and bring her here. And it turns out that the family scheme is, it's a disaster. It's unfair. The home scheme, for example, offers a £350 monthly payment per person. So councils are given, from what I understand, is £10,500 per person per refugee. Those that come through the Homes for Ukraine scheme. But the councils are given absolutely nothing for the refugees that come through the family scheme, which is incredibly unfair. So imagine someone, a British person in Ukraine who has invited all of their, relatives who are misplaced and desperate, and they all come here. And there are loads of stories where there isn't sufficient accommodation for them, and they're overcrowded, and there's even cases where people have to register as homeless. These are the extreme cases. But even on a less extreme case, all of us would really benefit from just a little bit of financial support, because apart from receiving our families here and having to look after them and to help them out, to go through all of the bureaucracy, which is so exhausting when we're already so exhausted, there's nothing for us. And at the same time, as well as supporting these families here, we are often support families that our family that remain in Ukraine. So currently I'm helping not just my family, my uncles, aunts, and cousins that are misplaced within Ukraine, but also my father's employees. He left Kakhovka, and he has a factory, a farming equipment factory, and he has 20 plus employees. And when I made him leave Kakhovka, one of his things that he told me, he was like, "But I'm responsible for 20 families here. How am I going to leave?" So I promised him that I will help to support them financially, which actually, as you know, Kherson at the moment is closed off, and it was almost impossible to get that money to them. But I'm happy to say that last week it was possible. I found my childhood friend found some cash, which is in complete deficit. All of the banks are defunct, and you can't get any cash even to give to people. So we've been able to transfer some funds to them. So, just to keep that in mind, that I don't understand why family scheme, British Ukrainians are being penalized basically for helping their families.
We've heard quite a bit about how Ukrainians in Ukraine regard Britain's aid and Boris Johnson. But has that changed outside of Ukraine then?
I don't know. It's such a complicated thing. Especially now with this war and the lies that the Russian state is, spouting out at us, I'm extremely, I find lying extremely triggering. So I have my own opinions about Boris Johnson and the current government. But when I spoke to my brother on Friday and I started explaining to him how we all feel here, and and he said, Olia, calm, but we also need, military help here in Ukraine. So it's a really difficult question, actually. So I have my own opinions, but it's almost between. I don't know why can't we just be helped on all fronts? It's the same. It's a reverse with Germany. There's absolutely no military help coming from Germany, but the family, an equivalent of family scheme, is working much better than here. So it's, I don't know. It's an extremely difficult question to answer. To be honest with you, we're all quite confused with regards to. What's most important. I just wish that we were helped on all fronts, really, within the UK, with our relatives and with our defenders, our families, our brothers and fathers and mothers and sisters that are fighting for Ukraine and Europe now in Ukraine.
Just whilst we're on this subject, has there been anything that's sort of frustrated you about the Western coverage of the war in Ukraine? Any big confusions or things that you feel have been inaccurate? Be interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Sorry, you caught me kind of. I might need to think about this one. I mean, there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot in Italy. There's quite a lot in Europe and America, where the concessions that we're supposed to make. The give up your territories and it is going to be all over. That kind of message is, it's despicable. So to say that we have to compromise and to just give up some territory and then it's all over. I'm sorry, but this is not on. Absolutely not on. We are, it's not just a map where people are free to take a pencil and start rewriting and redrawing the borders in that way. It's people and their houses and their livelihoods and their history and everything else. My native Kherson region, for example, or Donbass or any other occupied territory. Okay, yeah, let's just forget about those people. Okay, you can just be part of Russia now. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. My parents want to come back. They don't want to be in Germany. They don't want to be in Britain. They want to be home. So no, that's been really pissing me off in the past month or so when people started saying, let's just give up some Ukrainian territory. That's not on.
Yes, I think it's been very interesting seeing the remarks of Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz, which seem to be more in this way of thinking around concessions, and it seems to very rarely actually engage with the Ukrainians themselves. It's as if they're operating in a sort of different space almost. But do you think, this has been a question that's been asked by a listener, do you think that there is any appetite in Ukraine for any sort of territorial concessions at all in the context of ending the war as soon as possible, or do you think that there is a real resolve in Ukraine to fight until absolute victory?
Oh, I do not know of anyone who is up for giving up even a meter of Ukraine to Russia. I personally, I do not know anyone, and I know quite a lot of people personally and quite a lot of people online. That's just not a question. And another question actually is the slowness in recognizing that actually genocide is being committed. Hitler and what he did, that's in history now, and maybe that's easier to accept. But for some reason, what's happening now is kind of like, I just feel like there's a lack of acceptance. That's what's happening now is Ukrainians as a nation are being exterminated. You heard Putin the other day. He's even dropped the mask. Not like anybody believed him anyway. But now he's saying we're just expanding our empire. We're taking land back and all of that stuff. You spoke about it on the podcast yesterday, I believe. It's it needs to be recognized, and we need urgent help.
Just one more question from me on that, if that's all right. When we talk about Russian colonialism, what does that mean for you?
Oh, it means so many things, and I have been aware of it my whole life, but I didn't have the terminology, if you know what I mean. So I knew that it was happening, but I couldn't kind of describe it intellectually. It was more of a feeling. I've known since I was little that my mom and dad, when they were little in the Mykolaiv region of Ukraine, if you spoke Ukrainian in the school, for example, you'd be called seluk, you'd be called a villager, a peasant. You were discouraged from speaking a Ukrainian language. Out of 10 schools in Voznesensk, where they're from, only one was Ukrainian, and that was the worst school, made so on purpose, with the weakest teachers, with 8 classes forms instead of 10. So obviously, like all of the Stalinist repressions of our culture, etc. I knew all of that, but actually only now I'm realizing how deep, especially in the in the regions in the south and east of Ukraine, the closer to the center, to the Moscow center we were, the more oppressed we were. I grew up speaking Russian, a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian, really, and I always understood Ukrainian. But when I immigrated, I left Ukraine when I was 12, and I got into an English school in Cyprus, and there was a questionnaire, and it said, "What's your first language?" And I just kind of stumbled, and I stopped, and I said, "Oh my God, I really want to write Ukrainian, but shall I write it? Because actually I speak Russian." And then I came over to my mom and I asked her, I was like, "Mom, I feel extremely Ukrainian, but why do we speak Russian, And that was probably one of the first times when I actually kind of really, that was made aware in that kind of way, even though my parents obviously always talked about it, but kind of outside of my family. And now I'm learning more and more, and kind of, I know it might sound strange, but almost like trying to decolonize myself in terms of my knowledge of Ukrainian literature and artists and political activists, etc. I'm starting to learn, and I'm educating myself and trying to also spread that kind of information on Twitter and Instagram, etc.
Just while we're on that subject, are there any Ukrainian writers or artists that perhaps listeners should be aware of, that's writing either particularly eloquently about the war in Ukraine, or perhaps just generally that they should read for understanding Ukrainian culture?
Yeah, I'm actually preparing. I have a really long list, and I'm going to post it on my Instagram if people are interested. It's Olia Hercules. At the moment, I'm reading Lina Kostenko, who's an amazing, contemporary Ukrainian writer, and I'm very interested in actually going back, all the way back to Lesia Ukrainka, who's one of the first prominent Ukrainian writers. And but yeah, I have a very long and amazing list that I will publish, and if people are interested, I would love for them to see it.
In the West, speaking on the matter of culture, in the West, and I think certainly in Britain, Zelensky has become a real cultural icon, a figure that has been celebrated around the world. Just wanted to hear your take on Zelensky. I mean, it seems that he was perhaps not universally popular before the war, but what's your take on him and his handling of the conflict since it began?
I think he's been pretty amazing, actually. I don't believe my parents voted for him, and there have been a lot of kind of loads of things that weren't going so well in the beginning of his presidency. I think people weren't entirely happy with, as always is the case. I think it takes time for changes to happen, be implemented. Who knows what it would have been, whether if Ukraine remained peaceful and where he would have gone. But as a wartime leader, he's proved himself to be pretty incredible so far. And he didn't leave, which is amazing. He and not only that, he's very eloquent, and he's been making all of these amazing speeches. And I think, especially at the beginning of war, for our morale and kind of like, it gave us strength that propelled us on to keep going. I think he's done an amazing thing.
I just have one more question on Zelensky. There's been some articles that have been written here in the West, and we've spoken about them on the podcast, that sort of hypothesise what may have happened if Zelensky had left the country, as you described, that he didn't do so, or if he had been killed. And we know that the Russians had tried to have him assassinated. What do you think will have happened if that had occurred? I know it's very difficult as a hypothetical, but do you think that he has been absolutely central to the Ukrainian effort to defend itself? Or do you think actually that somebody else would have stepped in and we would still be in a similar situation now with as far as the war is going?
It's hard to tell. No, I think it was pretty important that he stayed. Not just and then there was no kind of, Russia didn't have another angle where they could have said, oh, there, your president has defected. There's another junta, or I don't know. It would have been so much easier for Russia to manipulate the situation even further, and it definitely would have, affected people's morale and ability and strength, to fight and keep going.
Olia, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. Is there anything we haven't spoken about that you think is important for our listeners to know or understand?
I just would love to ask everyone to keep going and to keep supporting us. I know that summer is here, and and there is fatigue. It's an absolutely normal thing for everyone to just get extremely tired of war and of bad news. But if you want to take a break from headlines, that's fine. Maybe you can kind of read up on Ukrainian writers, or whether contemporary or historical, and keep posting online and just keep us in everyone's kind of head and understanding a little bit. And I think that's my message from me, from my family, and from my brother. Please, we still need your help this summer and onwards.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 30 days completely free at telegraph.co.uk/audio. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly with us by emailing podcasts@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear, and today on Twitter, Sophie Coe.